Well, let's see here. Good day, everyone. It's nice to be. What? 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 That's like real people, and like in person. Like this is like I feel like the guy in Jurassic Park that first saw dinosaurs. Oh my gosh. Hey, can everybody hear me? Okay, I'll get a nice thumbs up on something like that. Anybody here? Hey, does anybody hear me? Hello, hello, hello. Audio check. We good? Erica, give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. All right. All right. It's so good to see everybody. Hybrid is the word of the day. This is what they meant by hybrid. That was, I thought it was like, two different dinosaurs and two different species. Or okay. Good on that. Wow. Okay. Good to see you. Camera's moving. Well, hey, welcome everybody to the Harry E. Wood High School, which dates me a little bit. I think it's now known as Union Campus. I actually spent several lifetimes in that building as part of my career, and I'm very, very fond of it. We have a great one for you. Welcome everybody that's online as well as usual. We have a terrific one on leadership. There's a special person in the room. We'll get to him in just a moment, but we do want to recognize a few people here, um, like those that have recently joined the chapter. Welcome, new members. If you're a new member, you happen to be there in person, please stand up and wave at everybody so you can be applauded, perhaps. And if not, if you're online, hey, please jump into the chat window. Let us know that you're here also. Congratulations on being new members. And an even higher honor is whether or not you've been newly certified. 3 more members newly certified with their PMPs. Congratulations to these folks. Catching the applause in the room. And now let's jump to a few announcements before we move on to the main event. Hey, I don't know if you've noticed, there's been an update to the talent triangle. I actually have a slide to show on this. There we go. So here's the changes. Technical project management becomes ways of working. Leadership, the topic of tonight, is power skills. And strategic and business management becomes business acumen. And if you hit the PMI site, you'll be able to learn more about those. So let's see here. Hey, a date to hold on your calendar if you happen to be a volunteer for PMI. Okay, July 16th, volunteer appreciation event. So you want to hold that time right there. Other time you may want to hold if you're interested in sitting in on one of the PMI CIC Board of Director meetings. They meet first Wednesday of the month starting at 6:15, and people are welcome to attend and submit topics for discussion. Don't lose your chapter benefits, by the way. Ensure that you're signed up for auto renewal for your membership as you go through the year. We always ask people to check that out. And there will be a survey. I believe if you're there in person, the survey will likely be emailed to you. So watch out for that email after the event to be able to check that out. All righty. All that's going pretty well. And it's now time here for a word from the board. Tonight's featured board member, Vice President of Professional Development. Welcome to the stage, Galen Hill.
Thank you, everyone. We really appreciate you coming out tonight. It has been a while since we've been in person, and we just really, really thank you for being here tonight. We do hopefully, should COVID cases keep down in the great state of Indiana, we do plan on maybe doing one in June, August. September, remember, is our PDD day. It's the 15th and 16th, so please mark your calendars. We're very excited. We are pairing with both the Central Illinois chapter and the Central Iowa chapter again, so it should be really exciting. It will be a virtual event. Were you looking forward to in person? I'm so sorry, but we are looking to plan a networking in person, so that should satisfy you. Is that a yes? We do a in-person networking. um, and of course, we'll finish out the year in October and November. I do want to take a quick, brief moment for those of you who have not met our board. I wanted to introduce them. So we have Erica, who is our Executive VP. We have Casey, who is our President. And we have Kelly, who's our VP of Communications. And the board really welcomes you back and thanks you very much for coming out and supporting us tonight. Please don't forget to fill out your survey. Your comments really help us go a long way. So give us the good and the bad. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Rich. Thank you.
Thank you, Galen. All righty, folks. It's now time for the boring gray and black slide. But we have a copyright and disclaimer message here. Understand the values of PMI, and we state them and we live to them. All work presented here is the intellectual property of those that are presenting, and views, thoughts, and opinions expressed by those people are their views, and not necessarily those of PMI or PMI CIC. And the unauthorized reproduction, distribution, of copy work is illegal and punishable in a federal law unless you have the express written permission of Major League Baseball. I'm just kidding about the Major League Baseball part of that. And now that we've gone through that, we have gone to the lengths of the U.S. military to find someone to help you get from where you are to where you want to be in your professional career. And we're really, really pleased to have this speaker. So this month's special guest speaker this evening is a U.S. Army officer with 22 years of military experience in direct and organizational leadership. Lieutenant Colonel Jeff Bottrell is an experienced operations officer with a demonstrated history of working in the military industry. He is skilled in Army Aviation Operations, helicopter piloting, system administration, team building, organizational leadership, and project management. Also a process and systems-oriented leader, the Lieutenant Colonel's current role is developing future Army leaders of tomorrow as Professor of Military Science at IUPUI. Please join me in welcoming Lieutenant Colonel Jeff Bottrell.
All right, got my slides up. First off, I want to say thank you. As I got to kind of walk around the room, I'm kind of humbled in the audience that we have today, both in person and online, just by the experience that I've gained just from talking to you and your past experiences. Also, veterans that are in the audience, I want to say thank you for your service as well. And PMI, it's incredibly humbling to be here to talk about a subject that I'm pretty passionate about. So we'll get into kind of what we're going to discuss, but today should be kind of fun, conversational. So if you have any questions, comments, or funny stories, I'm going to try and entertain you a little bit with some of my bump scars and tattoos like I talked about earlier. But for the most part, I'm really just want to talk about the art of leadership. So a little bit about me, okay? We got 22 years of Army experience. It has been really fun. I have been blessed with having the opportunity to just enjoy my job. Part of that is because, as you can see, each one of these patches on here, I usually get a new one about every 18 to 22 months. So I get to get in, get to understand the job, and just by the time I get comfortable, it's like you're doing what they call a PCS, a permanent change of station. So each one of those patches, you can see they kind of ramp up as you get a little bit more senior and you get to jump around in your career, which I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with, having to jump in with your expertise into new locations. But each one of those is a move that I have really enjoyed being able to do. A little bit of background, I came in the Army, 18 years old as an aircraft electrician. It's like, I really enjoy this. I really like aviation. I'm going to go do that for the rest of my life. So I went into ROTC and I got my commission and I got selected, luckily, for my first choice, which was aviation. And I got to fly a Kiowa Warrior, which is, you've been in the Army a while when you get to retire two like squadrons worth of aircraft. So I got to see the retirement of two of those. But my background is in manufacturing. That's kind of what I got my degree in. And I'm like, manufacturing, going to flight school. I didn't take a lot of physics class. So I studied really hard in flight school just to get by. Later, I pursued kind of my passion when I was at the Command Staff College, which was leadership. I just really enjoy how to motivate people. How do you get a group of people or a team to a goal? So that's kind of one of the biggest things I want to talk about today is how do you get your team going in the same direction that you want them to go with the energy you want them to have. Lastly, I was blessed when I was stationed in Michigan to get to go to the Lean Six Sigma Black Belt course in Warren, Michigan. And that's kind of where I started to see the similarities between project management as a civilian and what we do in the Army. So I'm going to kind of show you a little bit of that here in a second. Part part of the project management piece is you got to lead a team, right? So my most important team is depicted on this slide. So that's my family. As soon as I tell you I've got 4 daughters and their ages are 12, 11, 10, and 9, I usually get the, oh my goodness. But it's project management on a day-to-day basis, okay? And I know most of the heads that are shaking in here are going, yes, yes it is, okay? I'm a glutton for punishment. So each one of those patches, except for the ones that went overseas, we did what they call do-it-yourself moves, where I literally would get a rental truck and box everything up, and I would do it myself. Part of that's this, we'll get into micromanaging here in a second. The control, I didn't want my stuff to get messed with. I didn't want people touching my gear. But a lot of that was kind of to demonstrate work to my kiddos. I go to work, but I wanted to come home and let them kind of enjoy in some of this. So every one of those patches, except going to Korea, we moved ourselves. So kind of the first deal I learned project management was I'd already deployed, went to Iraq, served as an operations officer, was a platoon leader, did all the fun stuff that you can do as a aviation platoon leader. And then I got back, I'm like, let's move the whole family. My wife was 3 months pregnant. It was December in upstate New York. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that area or kind of what happens in that season, but it's a little rough. I didn't do the basics, which is kind of what we're going to talk about today. I can humbly say that now. So I have my dad, who's a truck driver. I'm like, Dad, you want to come up? You're going to help me move the Penske truck with a trailer. I'm going to take my family. I've got a trailer on my truck. We'll caravan down to Fort Knox, Kentucky. It's going to be easy. And he pulls up to the house, gives me a hug, and he goes inside. And he has moved several times before, and the amount of boxes that had stuff in them wasn't where he would have liked them to be, considering we were leaving at 6 o'clock the next morning. So my dad quietly and with a lot of grace was like, let's get after it. So we packed until about 2 in the morning. And I can assure you, if you've ever been to New York, as soon as we lifted the tailgate of the truck, it started snowing, as it should. I call that Betrell law, not Murphy's law. Okay, so we get done packing about 2 o'clock in the morning, pull the hatch down the truck, everything's staged like a good Army officer in the driveway, ready to roll out at 6 o'clock prompt. At 6 o'clock, we get there and we dig about 18 inches of snow out from our truck. And we drive completely tired all the way to Fort Knox, and a 6-7 hour drive took about 14 and a half in the conditions we were in. And then we had to unload air mattresses that we packed in the front of the moving truck. 6 months later, I'm like, Dad, I'm doing this again. I've learned from all my mistakes, I swear. We're going to pack up and we're going to move from Fort Knox, Kentucky, just outside of Louisville, to Seattle, Washington. And I'm going to do it with a 6-day-old. That should make things a little less complicated. So we boxed everything up from our 2-bedroom apartment, and we had it staged. I literally took our family in. We did a detailed timeline. In the Army, we call them horse blankets. So like who's doing what when, so water flow, whatever you want to call it, waterfall chart. I had that for my family. And then I sat them down in seats like we have here, and I said, time, as I know as an air crew member, we're about to do a crew brief. Here's your mission packet. And I handed out, hey, first slide should be a timeline. Here's where you need to be. Vehicle number 2, here's your call points, your checkpoints. And I did it just like I would manage a project in the Army and just like I would do for any task that I was given. And it went a lot more smooth. Except for I can live on turkey sandwiches. My mom wasn't so happy with 6 days of turkey sandwiches. So we made some adjustments. But that's kind of what I want to talk about. Project management needs to be kind of ingrained in everything you do. Okay, it needs to be a habit. Okay, you need to generate these wherever you are in your career. It's not too late to start getting habits to make you successful. And I can tell you, in the Army, we have a saying, and I think I might have plagiarized it. It's the highest form of flattery is plagiarism. So if I see something good from a leader, I'm going to emulate it. I'm going to go, hey, that's mine now. I'm going to mold it to shape my personality. But you need to absorb that stuff. We always joke there's 2 types of lessons you learn in the Army: the right way to do something and the wrong. Hopefully you get more of the right, but when you get the wrong, you just kind of say, I'm not going to do that. But the right lessons are the ones that you can take in, and that's kind of what I want to talk about, some of the right things that I've seen as leadership that helped me kind of on my trajectory for accomplishing missions at a little bit higher level of responsibility. Lastly, some of these, I speak Army very well, so I'm trying to learn some civilian lingo to put kind of in perspective of some of the assignments. So when I say a platoon, it's about 30 people. In Army Aviation, it's anywhere from 17 to 30 people, depending on how many aircraft you have. 2 or I think I had 3 troop company commands. Those are various. So some of the background was a logistics company command. It was about 250 soldiers. And it supported a bigger organization of aircraft. So that was news to me. I rolled into a job and they're like, you're going to take over G Troop. And I'm like, I don't know what that is, but start Monday, I'm here. So went in with the attitude of humility. Yeah, that was probably the biggest thing. If you can take something away from me, is the only successes I've ever had was because I got humbled quick. So going into a logistics company, fuel, ammo, movements, distribution, feeding 500 people, I now was responsible for that. And I can just say I'd never been trained for that. It was just grit and humility got me through it. And it was a lot of fun. Then I went to what I knew, which was an aviation command, which was about 40 people and 10 aircraft. And then after that, I got into recruiting. So the whole world of marketing, talking to people, put me a little out of my comfort zone, so to speak. So that was kind of new to me. And once again, grit and humility went a long way in that one. Go to the Command Staff College, Squadron XO, about 570 people in an organization with about 30 helicopters. So it was pretty fun. We took that unit to Korea on a deployment from Fort Bragg, or a rotation, and just had an awesome time just working with the people in that team. So it was a whole lot of fun. That's kind of where I learned my techniques for leadership, and that kind of got me my next job. So if you see a trend where like you learn some things and they kind of pull you into the next job, pulls you into the next job, if you're networking, however that works, building your reputation, developing the habits that people see you consistently do are kind of what pulled me into that next job. Luckily, I had a great mentor who's like, hey, you're about to leave Korea next month. You want to come back? And I'm like, absolutely. Can I bring my family? So we brought my family to Korea, and I spent about 2.5 years there as a brigade operations officer. So a brigade, about 3,700 people. It was really kind of an interesting unit. We had about 120 aircraft, and we had an engineer battalion. So I think I talked to a combat engineer there for a little while. I didn't know how to use an engineer unit, let alone employ one with helicopters. So it was kind of news to me. But once again, humility and grace got me a long way, and I had a lot of fun. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, if I had to speak civilian, that's kind of what those units mean if you haven't had prior service. So why is the Army guy here? Do these look familiar? Okay, you've probably seen like lots of wheels, lots of arrows, like process flows, systems that you can use. Guess what? We do that too. Okay, ours are two-dimensional. They have to be printed in like colors so you can put it in your pocket and run away so it doesn't smear in your pocket. But for the most part, it's very similar. Okay, so when you get into like the plan, direct, control, organize, if you look on this chart, this is kind of how a commander or a project manager would run an organization. If you have a staff, this is kind of symbolic of what the staff does, okay? It helps you understand the situation you're in. So defining the scope of work, okay? That's probably the biggest thing that you will see in project management, where as a leader, it's kind of like, so what are we doing here? Okay, what did the boss actually tell us to do? Because sometimes we call them gifts. Good idea fairies come along, and we jump into, they said to do this, but I really kind of think they meant. And you open it to interpretation. Well, that staff is here to help you kind of understand, visualize, and kind of help you direct in project management. So that's the feedback you get from your team. I absolutely love feedback. I know myself well enough to know that I definitely don't know everything, let alone a lot of things. So it's always good to just get candid feedback. And what kind of the theme of what I'm going to talk about is just developing a culture within your project management team that solicits that response. Okay, sometimes you have people that's like, okay, good, they like to talk a lot, like me. Okay, and then you're going to have sometimes where it's, I need to talk to this one person because I need this detail. And it's just getting to know your Army talk formation well enough that you know how to pick those pieces out so you can maximize your time. The thing I get to talk about today is, leadership piece. Now that you've changed that up, I'll augment my slides for power skills, I think is what we're going to. The leadership piece of this, I really break it. If you're a person who in their mind likes to bin things, and you like to really kind of say it fits in this bin and then this bin, and they, like my kids' toys, they go into a bin and the Legos can't touch the little figurines or whatever. I'm a very let's mix it all together kind of person. Okay, but when I do leadership, it's kind of two bins, right? You have the science and the art. I want to talk to you today about the art. Okay, some of the bumps, scars, and tattoos that I have learned the hard way. So 2 ways of learning things in the Army that we joke about: trauma and repetition. I hope you get more of the latter, but I've had a few of the first one. So I'm going to kind of talk a little bit about those. All right. So I'm going to do a quick query. So if you're alone, like taking this online, go ahead and raise your hand. It won't be weird, I swear. How many people here have ever been micromanaged? So, and if your boss is in the room, just go ahead and keep your hand down. Just nod subtly. Okay. So everybody has had that experience of being micromanaged. Okay. It's a little different, but how many people have worked for a micromanager? Okay, so we got some head nods and everything going on. There's a couple of hands out there. Okay, how many of you are a micromanager? Okay, we got one honest person. Okay, so mathematically, I'm not a statistician and any of that kind of stuff, but I'm pretty sure if I were to say with some certainty, statistically, that's impossible. So what I'm going to say is there's a rheostat. Okay, so if you go into Merriam-Webster's like I did, you do the ominous Google search and you pull up effective managers versus micromanaging. There's plenty of speeches that you can go on about this. But if you take anything away from this, it's the micromanaging piece is the excessive part. Are you getting to the point where you're just doing it to do it and it's not producing an outcome? You have to avoid that, okay? And it's you getting either feedback, just being self-aware, whatever it is, but knowing when you've cranked the rheostat too far one direction. Certain people at rheostat, you're like, I'm going to set it on 3. I know this person. I've got a good relationship with them. It's a 3 all day long. And then you're going to go into a group. It's like, this is new. I'm going to go to 7, and then I'll throttle it back 5, 6 as I get comfortable with the group. And that's kind of the piece for this is a lot of times the subjectivity comes into play with micromanaging versus effective managing. And the key to project management that I have found through the years is knowing when to ratchet up that rheostat. Because sometimes you might work with somebody who doesn't give you the details you require. Maybe contextually they don't know why you need them. Which is slide 5. We'll talk a little bit about giving the context. But some of that might be like, I need to know the specs on this specific item. You're like, why do you need to know that? It's not within your lane. Well, I'm going to go do a sales pitch to somebody to get a part even faster. That happens a lot of the time. And it's just kind of knowing that, hey, they're going to feel micromanaged for a moment, and then you can adjust the rheostat once you get what you want. The effective management piece, managing like just a degree of skill. So that's where how well can you incorporate that science of leadership into your personality? A lot of leadership is personality, networking, and just relationships. Surprisingly enough, it was pretty senior in my career when I found out that most Army officers are kind of introverts. I had no idea, and it's up there. It's a significant amount, like 80%. 72% of statistics are made up on the spot, so please don't quote me on that. But it was pretty high, and they do an assessment. I'm like, I'm extroverted all day long, and now I think there's a third one, like ambivert or something. It was kind of humbling to go, I'm a little reserved, but in situations where I get to interact with people, learn about what they know, I just love it. I love hearing people's stories. I love getting to know people, because part of that too is if we're on a team, I have just built a relationship with you and I understand your skill set just this much more. So if I can get to that point, that's kind of the piece of managing that I like to be in. The last piece I want to touch on is the effective. Are you getting the job done? Okay, so that's probably the biggest thing with project management. The effectiveness and the efficiency at which you do it is something you tweak along the way as you get better with that science piece, and as you get better understanding the art of leadership, you're going to be able to increase that proficiency. And that's part of why we're all in this room today. We get to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is just leading and just motivating people. So that's kind of the piece I want to focus on throughout the rest of this. All right. So we call these bumper stickers. I kind of learned that from working with some civilians in Korea. So a bumper sticker, I put it in red, so you read that one first. Team building. Anybody here think you need a ropes course, an escape room, or one of those things to build a team? You're looking at me going, he probably builds a team with like a rubber raft filled with water, or a telephone pole with 15 people carrying it long distances. Anybody get that? Like, you think you need that? So I'll say team building, that's morale building. So are you going to do some fun things to get people comfortable? It's like the icebreaker. But when we're actually pulling the layers of the onion back and we get into team building, just do the work. I find the most enjoyment just sitting down going, what are you working on? Tell me about it. That's also, if you go back to the last slide, how you avoid micromanaging. Just be passionate about it. Be like, hey, what do you got work? What are you doing today? Walk me through your process. You're doing two things. You're demonstrating like compassion and caring for a person, but you're also getting the details. So all those details, if you would have said, I want you to write me a one-page paper on what you're doing, it comes across as rheostat on 7, micromanager, ping, 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 ping. But if you sit down, grab a chair, and take some time out of your schedule and go, talk to me about what you got going on. Because you can pull a lot out of that. Has anybody had a leader who does that? It's pretty fun, isn't it? Like when they sit down and show genuine concern, you're like, I'm going to keep working for this person. I actually need to crank it up a little bit of my productivity level when you get that kind of compassion from a leader. We do that every day. And it's time that you don't just acknowledge that it's worthy of building a team, but you also have to acknowledge that you have to do it habitually. And that's the piece that I really want to emphasize is this stuff has to be just kind of ingrained in your nature. It's like, I'm gonna allocate one day to walk around. I can tell you in 20 years of being, we'll call it high octane, like I've always been operational units, and I've just had fun. Sarah knows I am not leaving the office before 6. It's for 2 reasons. The traffic to get out of a gate on a military installation is absolutely horrible between 4:30 and 5:30. So if I leave at 5, I'm not getting home at 6 anyway. So I don't leave till 6. The real piece behind this that Sarah discovered about 5 years into our marriage was that I talk to people constantly, all day. So the first part of my day is making the rounds. It's if I'm running a staff, it's going and talking to each individual staff section. I hate meetings. I'm not a big fan of them. But if I can sit down and pull all the data and then I can relay it to the next person, that's kind of how I viewed leadership in the past, is just being able to tell the same story 100 different times so that people get the same picture in their mind. So that's kind of the piece for that team building piece. The other piece is when you do team building properly, you're really increasing your capacity to do more things. Okay, so we do a thing in the Army called mission command. Okay, it's motivating people to make sound decisions through disciplined initiative. Okay, it's basically saying I trust you to make good decisions. I'm going to caveat that. A great mentor of mine told me like the highest level you can get is to act and report. Because obviously in a uniform, I can make an action happen, but I have to report. It ends at Congress with us. You got to determine that on your organization where your reporting lies. And then the step below that is kind of ask and then accomplish it. So that piece is kind of what we like to focus on, is empower your team. Let them make the decisions, or at least set the environment where you're getting feedback from. Be like, that's a great idea. I think you need to do that. What I found is like with junior officers, when I'm actually trying to empower them, they're like, am I really that empowered? Like, yeah, make the decision, man. Go for it, please. They're like, serious? Like, yeah, I really don't want to make that decision. Please go forward and make that decision on your own. And we set ourselves in environments where they have to. So I'm a firm believer that a platoon leader needs to lead their platoon. So if they've got a team of 30, 40 people, it's, hey, platoon leader, this is what I want you to do. If I fail, it's because I didn't articulate my intent well enough. So get passionate about just telling that story about what you want to accomplish. So that's defining the scope in project management. Does everybody have a common picture of what we're trying to accomplish? And doing that on a daily basis, as I went along, when I became an operations officer, there was a lot of people. So I had to find the people that I had to tell the story to. And on that span of control you get into, where it's about 3 to 7 people. Everybody ever heard that? Like you can comfortably control about 3 to 7 organizations, 3 to 7 people. I have validated that. So I went up to 8, didn't work out so good for Jeff Petrell. But when I kept it about 5, and I didn't get into that micromanaging role where I jumped into somebody's staff section, it was a lot more streamlined. So back to some of the team building piece. You empower that individual. Say, hey, here's what I want you to do. This is what I need it done by. I'm going to hold you accountable. One of the things that I've found, and it's as you go along in your career, we call them, there's 2 briefings that people kind of gloss over. And I'm going to ask you to civilianize this for me. Okay, so the first one is you do an operations brief. Okay, so this is where you sit down with your team and you go, this is what we were tasked to do. Okay, I always get these 2 mixed up, but that's probably why they get glossed over. There's a confirmation brief and a back brief. This is kind of where you get a sense on how somebody understands that project, but it's also the same time where you empower them. So you sit down and you go, okay, what'd I just tell you? How many people honestly do that every single time they sit down with their team? About as many micromanagers as we have in the room. So it's not micromanaging. I'm telling you, please do it. Because you're like, hey, what did you hear me say? Because I can sit here and say something, and you're going to hear something totally different. And it's that interpretation filter gets on. I like to call it Army telephone. As soon as I say a story, by the time it gets to the last person on the phone line, it's not what I said. So as soon as you turn that on, go, hey, what is it I said? Just give me a synopsis of what's going on. And that's the habit I want you to form. And that has saved me on numerous occasions, because as soon as somebody says something, I'm like, no, I did not say by Friday. I said by tomorrow. I can see how those could be confused because it's Monday, but I really need it on a Tuesday. And you can get some clarification on that. And then you also get a sense on how well the person was listening, because, hey, did you take good notes? Or are you just banking on, I'm going to send you the slide deck, okay? And then once you get done, you let them go, okay? You let them, if they have a team that they're leading, you empower them to go and you give them some time. And we call it the 1/3, 2/3 rule. I've heard, 2/5, 3/5. I've heard all sorts of fractions. Give them enough time to go organize their team, develop a plan, and then come back and do the back brief. This is, hey, I tasked you with something and empowered you. How are you going to do it? So you're also throttling back that rheostat from micromanaging, tell me every step, to conceptually, what is it that you're going to do to accomplish this project I gave you? That is something that I see fail all the time. It's something I'm guilty of not doing. And you're like, oh, I'm going to go check in. And you're like, it's halfway through a project. And you're like, we're going to have to do a hard turn. Those are painful and expensive. So especially if you're working with contracts and stuff, it's going to cause huge delays if you got to, do a hard left turn or a hard right turn because you didn't check in, you didn't make sure that their plan was in line with what you wanted. So regardless of how big it is in scope, do it. And do it for every project you task your team with. And I will tell you that the payment that you're going to get on the team building is going to be huge. You are going to have a team that comes back and goes, I'm trusted to make decisions, and I'm trusted to give feedback on how I want to accomplish the mission. Sometimes you're going to have to figure out who gets what rheostat set to what setting, because that span of control, like as a brigade ops officer, I had 7 battalions that I would work directly with their ops officers. And on any given project, 3 of them were going to require deeper dives into the back brief, or I was going to have to sit there and be like, okay, you guys are dismissed. We're going to keep doing this confirmation thing. Okay, let's pull the slides back to 1, and we would restart. You have to know your teams well enough to be able to do that. And then it gets to a point where when you get a different project, you go, this team is now going to be the one that's going to excel. So I can turn the rheostat down because it's something they like. And I'm tasking them to do it, so they're going to get after it. But you kind of see that with your team building. I would say that the other piece is reaching outside of the organization. I don't know if a lot of people are comfortable doing that. And I will say that if you're in a project management role, at least in my line of work, a lot of that is coordinating outside of your team. So whether that's up, across, or out, you need to be comfortable with identifying who it is that are key players with who you need to do business with. I always say I got to go do some networking, I guess you would call it, but it's planting the seed. So if it's I have something I'm working on, I'm going to go talk to somebody down the road to plant that seed. It's like, hey, in 2 months, remember this ugly mug. I'm going to come to you and ask and say, this is what I'm working on. Can you help me? Or you're going to get this tasking because it supports what we're working on. Get comfortable spending time doing that. Whether you have to work it into your schedule or whether you just have to just happenstance like you're in a meeting, but make the time to go talk and network outside of your organization. Because I limited it to like 2 war stories. So when the crisis with ISIS thing happened in 2014, we were a 60-person team that went into Baghdad. So let's just say I had a lot of hats that I was wearing. So I went there as the aviation planner, and out the gate, there wasn't many helicopters in Baghdad anymore. We had taken them out of there. So I got to be the personnel recovery officer. So if somebody got isolated, I would coordinate their recovery. When aviation was there, I was in charge of saying how they could be employed. And then they made me the current operations guy who was doing the advising mission and overseeing that, which, once again, grit and humility went a long way in that one. Part of that networking piece was I was spread pretty thin. So when you're working with 20-hour days, because there's only 60 of you there, and you're waiting for reinforcements to come, that networking piece paid off. Because I knew, hey, I got to get an approval from the commanding general. I was a major. Didn't talk to the 3-star that often. But when a signature was needed, I knew that the front office person who processed requests liked Reese's peanut butter cups. To be honest, so did I. So go in there, split a pack of Reese's peanut butter cups, and a friend and a network was made. So just know that like those need to be intentional, and they can also be fun and productive at the same time. So just kind of make sure you build that into your schedule, because it goes a long way in the end. So last thing, well, not last thing, but one of the pitfalls. So it was probably about 10 years in where I was like, oh, I'm kind of running meetings now. I'm actually like kind of getting into the thick of project management, calling in outside agencies with like 5 letters in their acronyms that I had to learn. I started to understand the importance of identifying who they was. Has anybody worked on a project with them? Yeah. Did they get it done on time? I have yet to see them get anything done on time, because they should be doing it, but they didn't. Okay. So when I started doing this, I had a mentor of mine, the same one who mentored me when I was in Baghdad the second time. And I watched him plainly do it to a group of senior officers. Like I was the fly on the wall, taking copious notes, learning how to run meetings. And the first question he said when somebody said that phrase was, "Who is they?" And to hear that in a group of senior leaders, you're like, "Ooh, that was pretty rough," because they didn't identify who was doing the task. They said a shop, and it's frustrating because, like in the Army, we're broken into staff sections. Okay, so when you're talking to staff, you have like your HR, which is the S1, G1. Okay, it's HR, admin, all that kind of stuff. The S2, think marketing, think they're the ones who troubleshoot everything. So military intelligence is our 2. Operations falls in the 3. So when somebody gets up there and like, oh, they're doing it in the S3, the S3 is they. The S3 in some organizations is 200 people. It's like, okay, let's refine that window a smidge more. Who is they? And then we even complicate it more where we're like, oh, it's the 34. It's like, okay, the 34 is now narrowed down to 62 people. So who specifically? Oh, it's one of the majors. Well, there's 20 of them. Which major? And I ask you to peel that onion back, because you all just confirmed you have been in meetings where they were doing it. If the meeting is the point where we're going to identify they, see my second big bullet. It can come across a little brash. So there were a whole bunch of senior leaders that got called out by a senior leader, and I'm in the back going, yeah, he got him. And then we identified who they was, and then we started seeing some traction. If you're doing it in a meeting, it's okay to do it. You're setting a tone, okay? It might be a little one of being a little brash, but I ask maybe do it before. So we do read ahead slides. Anybody do read ahead where you send out the, hey, this is what we're about to talk about in your working group? Try to be disciplined if that's a thing you do. I'm a procrastinator a little bit. So sending out the read ahead, you'll get it at the end of my duty day. Is usually when I send it, which could be 9 o'clock at night. But if you can, the most successful I've been, it's like, hey, these things need to be filled in by tomorrow's meeting, or you're getting a who is they. So anybody seen the chart where it says, here's a task, and it says point of contact? And then you put the point of contact in it. I've seen it, I think, for these events and for like other projects I've worked on. Well, they'll put a staff section. Right, HR is working that. It's like, okay, see question number 1. So many problems are resolved with that. But it's also, if I flip the lens on how you look at that problem, who is they turns into who can I empower? And so if you can create a culture where it's like, hey, you own this project. So inside of this project, I'm empowering you to make decisions in that realm. So I want you to run that. So some of the things that happened today, like, hey, who's helping out the guest speaker, find out where to park and stuff. That stuff happens. You have to empower people to do that. And you'd be amazed at how quickly you see a team go. So if you do that right off the onset, it's very powerful. I learned this the hard way. I left with the coffee mug, and everybody signed my going away plaque that like 50% of the people who signed the back of it said, "Good luck, who's they?" Has a little scripture on the bottom. And I'm like, maybe I could work that a little bit better. So in the past 7 years, I've kind of worked out, here's the task list 2 days in advance. I want it filled in. And I don't put point of contact. I put first name, last name, staff section. Because clearly I want you to identify who is they. I also eliminate the micromanaging rheostat getting turned up a notch. To some. Some would look at that and be like, yeah, that's a little in the weeds, isn't it? And I will counter, it depends. Okay, it kind of depends on who you're working at, but at least I know when I need to have a data point, I can call directly to that person. So that's a huge piece of this. This last piece, the best organization, allow other leaders to pick who's doing it. So when you're working where you're leading other staff sections, anybody have one of those where you either have a contracting team that's doing something for you, resourcing? Don't just put it on them. Go, hey, in the back brief, just tell me who you have working on it. And just tell me why you chose them. That's a huge piece to empowering the person, but also you're getting to know the organization too, because life happens. If Jeff Petrell goes down, there is another lieutenant colonel that's going to step in and be a guest speaker. Not tonight, so don't work anything out. But for the most part, it's meant to keep going, okay? And I say let them define it because then you get to learn somebody in their organization. If the person who's in charge of that specific thing, whether it be a contract you've got working, a supplier, if they step out, have like life happening to them, you know directly who you can call to say, hey, oh, they're out, wish them luck for me. What are you working on? And you can get an update a lot easier. So that's kind of that refinement piece. And trust me, it looks really awkward too when you're running one of those staff sections and somebody calls you out because you didn't provide the they. And you're like, who's working on that? You're like, ugh. Who did I empower? Don't make the name up, just own it, okay? Every time, if you ever hear me say, that's me, that's my bad, it's me. But I can tell you I'm gonna go find somebody to help me out real quick. So just get comfortable with that. And then the part of the ownership piece of leadership is just saying, yeah, it is me, okay? If it's you and there's a shortfall, it's just saying, hey, that's my staff section, I'll fix it. Okay, so you get all the blame and none of the glory is also what that chart does. So it makes it easier to write the awards when the project's complete, okay? Any questions or like we call them techniques, tactics, and procedures that are beneficial across the crowd? Any like to soften the blow of saying who's they in a meeting that are effective? Anybody got any? Yeah.
So what you do is you put name and rank. Fill that out.
Yeah, so typically what we'll do is we call them chiclet charts. Anybody do the red and green and amber chart for task accomplishments? So if you're in the red, you're bad. Okay, even if it's like 100 days out, it's red. I gotta make it green. Typically we'll put a task and that'll be the status. And then I'll do a point of contact and a timeline to it. And that's everything. So this is where my rheostat, because I'm an aviator, I like checklists. I like to know every task is being picked off the checklist. So I put almost everything on we'll call it an execution checklist. It's pretty refined to the point where there's several people who probably like a little to the micromanaging side there, Jeff. And I'll be like, yes, it's my style. Just learn to deal with it for a smidge. But that POC piece will be on there, and I will farm that out and say, hey, sign up. Sometimes if I fill in a staff section, I will assign the staff section the thing, but I'll say, who is your action officer? Because if that's your team, if it comes down, it's like my team's got this task inside of this bigger scope project, cool. Maybe you're doing training, okay? If you have a small team underneath you, maybe you want to empower somebody and give them some face time in front of the next level supervisor. I don't know that unless you put it on that chart. So when I look and I say, you got a second lieutenant briefing a 3-star? They're like, yep. Let's see how this buffs out. We're going to do a rehearsal, like 5 of them, before that happens. And then you can kind of make sure that team's kind of developing in themselves. Okay, that's part of the power of that name being on there. So, yeah, go ahead.
A lot of our project management programs, whatever, systems we use, it requires a name. So
Yeah.
like it doesn't blame was on my dashboard. It's like, I gotta have it.
So those systems are the best when you find out that you're
Lieutenant
being
Colonel, sir?
Yeah, go ahead.
Lieutenant Colonel, thank you. If you will, could you please repeat the questions which come from the audience because they're not mic'd up, and that would help our online folks. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So the topic was brought up that a lot of the systems that we put in place are because automatically assign a name. So when a task comes up into a system, it's going to populate, I need a name in order to advance it or send the task out to the audience. I would say to mitigate that, because we do it too, there was a system called SMS that we used to use, and you'd be sitting on your laptop at work all of a sudden, and it was on the secret side and the unclassified side. And you get bing, bing. It's like, what? I just got 2 taskings. And it was because they did the who's they, the operations cell. Well, that goes to 17 people. And then 17 people get an email. It's like, they're not talking to me. The operation cell is tasked, but then it's who in the operation cell is now taking on that. I will say that a lot of that brashness where you can develop that networking is give a phone call before you hit submit. So our travel vouchers and stuff are processed the same way. It goes out to like 15 people when I want to go somewhere. And you're sitting there going, which one's going to action it? And then you're like, good job. Judy was on it today. It's kind of one of those things. It's like, hey, I'm submitting a travel voucher for travel. It's kind of time sensitive. And then they know the urgency and they have a face to it. And that's that building the relationship that I've had to work on. Unfortunately, Judy's like at Fort Knox, so it's a little harder for me to travel anywhere. But yeah, some of those systems personalize it a little bit. Put a face to it as best you can. And I know we're doing it with like the icons and like Teams and Skype where you can see my face. Be like, I just tasked you. But a phone call and a voice goes a lot of ways with that too. I think probably one of the best pieces that I can give, assumptions. How many think that's a good thing? Everybody heard what happens when you assume? You make something out of you and me. I'm going to challenge that perspective. Okay, and I know you're doing it. I just don't know if you're identifying it. So if you're in project management and you have a piece that's, okay, hey, I want to put the foundation in my house. Okay, when's concrete going to come? Well, when do you need them? When do you want to finish the house? I'm telling you, sometimes you just got to assume, hey, weather is not going to be horrible in Fort Drum, New York. I made a bad assumption because I didn't check the weather plan when I first moved. But some of those things for assumptions you have to do to continue driving the timeline. They need to be feasible, okay? So when you're like, hey, I'm going to assume for us, everybody knows the fiscal year for money, right? For the government starts on October 1st. The new fiscal year rolls over. That's when you get to start doing some projects, doing some training. I'll say sometimes it's an assumption that I'm going to have access to next fiscal year funding readily available, depending on what echelon you're on. But if I have a training event that's on October 2nd, I'd probably assume I need to readjust my date because it takes a little bit of time to change those contracts with that money. So a good assumption will be like, hey, new FI is rolling over. I think the 22nd of October is feasible, okay? So you're going to put that mark on the wall and make an assumption. And then you're going to have indicators. You're going to have somebody who's going to turn that assumption into what we call facts and say, hey, is this getting validated and will be accessible by the 5th of October? Because if it's not done by the 5th of October, I have to adjust my date. So I'm continuing to plan for the 22nd, but I have this trigger point where on the 15th or the 5th of October, if the condition's not set, I'm going to have to start coordinating to adjust things. You are already doing that instinctually for your projects, right? The only thing I say is I bold those in red because I have a tendency to forget which one is the assumption. So I'm like, oh yeah, we're going to have money. And then you get there and you're like, no money. Purse isn't even in the room, let alone it's empty. So you have to go, this is an assumption that I'm making, identify it and articulate it to your team. And that's when everybody can get a sense of what's going on. The last piece is that dartboard. We've all been in a meeting, right? We've all been in a working group. When you were in that meeting and somebody said, hey, when can you have that done? Did they just spout out a date right away? Some will, right? Or some will be like, well, kind of depends on when we get this purchased. It really depends on when we line up this. And then marketing's got to do their thing. And it gets kind of, I recommend just throw the dart. It has been working so far pretty well for like 12 years since I started doing it. What about the 12th? It's a Wednesday, my favorite day. And it'll be like Tuesday, my other favorite day. That's the best. And what that does is it breaks that ice barrier of getting the ball rolling. And it goes, hey, I'm about to talk about dates. Okay, so hey, the 12th, does that work for you? Well, I actually need 6 days because it's going to take me 3 days of lead time and then it's 2 more days. So what's feasible? The 15th? And then you start that conversation because some are just, they don't want to commit. So you already pin the tail on the person. It's like, you identified they. Now let's identify the when. And my recommendation, if there's ice that needs to be broken, is just go like that and go the 14th. How does that work for you? And then start your negotiation from there. And I have done that on the senior level where it's like, roger that, man. Is the 30th good for you? It's like, well, I got 2 engagements. Okay. How about the 5th of the next month? And then we start just, I don't want to say Army-isms, but we refine that shot group. We start getting into like where we need to be. And then a mark on the wall is better than no action at all. So if that mark on the wall is an assumption, go ahead and roll with it. Continue planning, continue moving, because at least the ball's inching closer to project completion. Okay, bump, scars, and tattoos. Ironically, I got a new one yesterday. So learning a little bit on my behalf. Once tasked, build your plan as soon as possible. So get ready for that back brief. Because you never know when somebody might be caught flat-footed above you, where you can roll in and be like, I have the horse blanket or timetable chart, whatever you call it. And I literally once, this is why I got my operations job, I think, is I walked in, they're like, we were prepping for a brief. I'm like, I don't know if we have a valid plan yet. And I taped this like 6-foot banner to the wall, and it had pencil marks on what I wanted to do. It was everything that my organization, I'm like, hey, this is how we want to do everything. They're like, yeah, that looks solid. And 90% of that got adopted just because I had it ready. And I was like, I'll go run and get it. And I ran to my office and I taped it to the wall. So as proactive as you can be, try it. You will probably get 90% of what you want if you start putting darts on the wall and just making some assumptions. And that has probably been the catalyst of like any success I think I've had as far as planning goes. It's just, let's just go. It'll buff. It's kind of the same. Okay. Lastly, learn the technique of escalating. This is kind of my last one, is learn how to use your boss. I don't do like the CC email, but that's apparently an office tactic where you're like, okay, I'm gonna send you an email. No response, I'm CCing your supervisor. No response, okay, it's a phone call, or it's I'm gonna go meet with their supervisor. A lot of that gets washed in just figure out what technique works best for you and your organization. I do sometimes BCC somebody, but that's mostly for situational awareness if I'm developing somebody. Just be like, hey, show some compassion. I'm training. Lastly, being in the know. Does anybody have somebody come to them asking them questions that are not supposed to be in your wheelhouse? I will challenge you to say, that's a good thing, okay? If somebody's coming to you, that means that you're a trusted agent and that you probably have eyes on the big picture. So instead of turning that negatively, because it has a tendency to eat up your time, because you're entertaining things that are outside of your job or scope, but that means inside your organization, people know you produce. So if they're coming to me asking me about military intelligence stuff, like, I don't know why you're asking me this, but I know a person, and I will get you to where you need to be. You're winning. Okay, so just know that that's kind of, if you've developed that kind of climate where people are coming to you, you're doing a good job. And if you need to hear that from me, it's a good thing. Lastly, I use my boss as a weapon system. It's a really effective one. Know when to go. We wear our rank here on our uniform, and we say, this is not on anymore. I need to call in some firepower. It's okay. You're doing 2 things. You're telling them you know what's going on. You're also identifying a need, and you're getting them to do something. Instead of diving into weeds, you don't want them to dive in because you haven't figured it out yet. So, hey, go work on this for me, and then you'll get some more traction. All right. So I think we're to the point where I've shared enough of my bump, scars, and tattoos that I hope you know that like leadership it's supposed to be fun. You have to be just wanting to do it. Because it's more infectious than COVID. Okay, people will see that you're energized and you're like, yeah, let's do this. And if you have genuine concern, most of you probably, I think I saw on the chapter website that it's a lot of steward of like servant leadership. People see that, they know it, and they can tell it's genuine. You will see a turnaround. Some of the best units I've ever been in, it's like, I don't want to leave. And the only reason I had to leave was because they were like, no, we're making room for the next guy. It's like, but I really want to stay. Was because of that aspect. I had leaders who identified they told me when I had to be done with it, and they were just compassionate, like, hey, you're falling a little short on this. Let's figure out how to get you complete on your tasks. And kind of took time to develop me and just show concern. And I guarantee you your organization's going to go, they care. That's probably like the best team building advice I could ever give from somebody who's had to do this in some, not just timelines, but some extenuating circumstances. So, hey, Rich, at this time, I'll go ahead and I didn't do a good job looking down for cues for questions. So I'll go ahead and open those up now. If anybody's wants
We
to
have
learn.
one. We have one right behind you online or on the computer monitor there. Right in your wheelhouse here, Lieutenant Colonel. What techniques would you recommend to confront or mitigate upper management, upper rank micromanagement? And would these techniques work both civilian and military? Thanks, Ken, for the question.
Well, in 2 years, I'll probably be able to tell you the second one. In both types of leadership structures. So I don't have the option to quit. So it's kind of one of those things. There's a little bit of a difference there that I want to make sure we identify. So it's not like I don't like working for them. I'm out. Okay, I'm going to work for them. So we have a little bit of a not power struggle, but we have to kind of develop an environment where we kind of want to work for that person. I'm going to flat out tell you, I've been in a situation where the Chief of Staff of the Army was asking for an assessment of one of his advising things that we were working on, and it was a fast turn. When Chief of Staff of the Army asked a question, it's like, okay, everything's shifting right, and I'm going to focus on this. And I had somebody literally standing behind me telling me how to change font in a PowerPoint. And I don't brag about this, but the whole reason I got selected for that job was because I had some mad PowerPoint skills at the time, which are completely faded now. And I could type fairly fast. So it was, what'd you say? Okay, I'm ad-libbing. So I didn't have the option of being like a little close. I will say the best thing that you can do is just implement those daily habits where you can go through your organization and develop the climate where I don't need to micromanage. Because either the information is flowing or it's just something you do on a daily basis where you check in and you get the details that you require. Now, if your back is against the wall and you have a timeline, tell them. And it's okay. I've had somebody say, hey, you're asking a little bit much of me right now. Okay, I'll throttle it back just a smidge because you're getting a little close to your comfort zone. But it's okay to say, I'm on a time crunch. I'm going to be on you a little bit to get this done. So you should be able to do that in both civilian and military. And escalating things, I have never found a boss that didn't want to help me. I have found bosses that want to help me more than I wanted them to. Sometimes you just have to compassionately tell them, hey, I really want to take this. Just say, and subtly hint, like, hey, I've got this. And then just demonstrate you do. So I think you can see that on both sides.
Lieutenant Colonel, I think just about run out of time for questions, but you left us your contact information, which I've displayed behind you there. So you would welcome any additional questions or folks to reach out to you, I take it. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. It's the longest email ever. So
I'll go back to it again.
If you find me on LinkedIn, I'm on there too. But like I said, this is something I'm very passionate about, and hopefully it's just a refresher. And thank you again for having me.
Okay, we really appreciate it. I have to put up this slide for everybody because it speaks to the PDU code that people need, as well as noting that our next program has a topic already, continuously involved project manager, technologies project manager should know in the age of DevOps. Lieutenant Colonel, thank you very much. We oftentimes want to provide some type of recognition, and I asked them to go out and get you something nice, but they didn't do it. I did. Yeah, you see, I was listening. I did have this nice Army National Coast Guard hat, but then I figure you probably have lots of apparel as well. So here's what we managed to do. We have this really wonderful certificate of appreciation to award you. And I think Galen actually has a physical copy. We haven't awarded a physical version of these in 2 years.
Yes. So this is your physical copy. Actually, Rich, you're showing the wrong one, but that's okay. It's all good.
Really?
Yes, wrong one. But for all of you who didn't know, we did a dry run on Monday. Woo, we had some technical issues, but Jeff, being the good sport that he helped us all through. He stayed what, an hour and a half with us to like iron out our technical issues. So I have a second appreciation for you that simply says, "Thank you for bringing the Army way to our dry run." Thank you very much. Oh, sorry,
Well, thank you very
upside
much.
down.
I'm not gonna lie, I had a lot of fun troubleshooting communications, and I want to say thank you for having me. The organization and the chapter it truly is a group of professionals, and I said it a lot, but in the Army we get to do some things where we get to acknowledge some excellence, and I wanted to take this time as a pseudo battalion commander. I get to award a Battalion of Excellence point. It's been a pleasure working with you to set this up, and I just wanted to say thank you.
Well, thank you very, very much.
I appreciate it.
Thank you.
And now it's time for this. Check that out. Yes, it's time for the Volunteer Mini Podcast, which is going to take a completely different form today than you've ever seen. Something special. Since you are there in person, we would actually like volunteers who helped make this event, particularly the in-person portion of it, help make it real. So I'd like to ask the following to come up to the front of the room here. Rushika Chander, Kim Henry, Cheryl Perkins, Terry Ware, Anna Varadi, and Dan Stevens. If you can come on up. We're asking that you take a little bit of a victory lap. I'd like for each of you to kind of wander by as I call out your name yet again. If you can wander past the camera and wave to the 22 attendees that we have online today. So Rushika Shander, you're the Director of Social Good and Photography. Give her a hand, everybody. Come on, walk on past the camera and wave. That is not Rushika Shander.
I'm just testing it out here.
Hey, Rushika! Kim Henry is our Director of Technology and Technical Wizard at that, the wizard. Yay, Kim Henry. Cheryl Perkins, the esteemed and cheerful greeter who's on the ceiling. Oh, there she is. All right, Terry Ware, registration savant. Thank you, Terry, for your help today. Hannah Varadi, the speaker whisperer. We also know this as speaker coordinator or speaker handler. Hi there, Hannah. Good to see you. And last but not least, Dan Stevens, the facilities check, the inspector. There he is, Dan Stevens, everyone. Thank you very much. All right, it's now time for networking.